Welcome to this fascinating world of vintage cars. The human race fell in love with the motor car as soon as it came on the market, and this love still goes on, especially at places like this where they have rallies. Here, if we can't afford to own a car of our own, we can go and enjoy the presence of someone else's. Look at that wonderful old Ford there, going way back. All right, those proud people possess it. But we, the lucky ones, haven't got all that expense. We can sit around a ring on a nice sunny afternoon, if you're lucky, and watch them ramble around there, taking us back in time to memories of when we recall relatives, friends, associates with similar cars such as that. Now, that's a famous old make there. That's Alvis. Alvis, the name we automatically associate with real old classic cars, but a name now associated with producing real heavy military vehicles. Yes, we can easily recall the time when this country produced, for over 50 years, some of the best cars in the world. And unfortunately, we are not in that position now through financial reasons and political reasons, I suppose, but it's nice to go to a show like this and enjoy other people's classic and vintage and veteran cars, and perhaps one day hope to own one of our own. Now, who wouldn't be proud to own this car? Another famous British make, that of Riley. Riley produced a car that suited not only the sort of classic owner, the better off owner. It was quite an expensive car to stay, but it also appealed very much to the sporting fraternity. Thinking back to the old circuit of Brooklands, the name Riley cropped up there with success many, many times. This really is one of the old fabric-bodied tours typical of the early 30s. There with the heat gauge on top of the radiator, which was quite easy for the driver to observe and not involved with any electronics, so you didn't get much trouble with it. And a view down inside at that attractive little Riley engine. The old traditional British sports spoked wheels all takes us back to an era that we love so much, and an era that I think every Englishman, Briton person should be proud of. There, another famous make of carburetor there, the SU carburetor. The essence of simplicity and reliability. But now I'm afraid it's all electronic, and we can't tune them like we used to. A little glimpse there at the steering wheel. You can see the controls on the steering wheel. That's where you had to adjust your air control and your advance and retard of your ignition. You were fully in charge of one of those cars, and when you drive them and are responsible for so much of them. An older Alvis again now. There's quite a lot of Alvises here at this show, and for the Alvis fan, that really must be quite a day's occasion. And even this carries the name Alvis as well. It really is a proud-looking vehicle. It's somewhat different to the traditionals. These were built around about 1948-50. It was a two-seater sports. I think the serial was a TB14. Once described as having a horrible whale shape, but I find them quite attractive by today's standards anyway. Very similar to the saloon of that day, but these were fitted with twin carburetors, giving them more power, and once again, Alvis provided some attraction and mobility for the more classic sports owner. Now then, this old make here is called a Singer. No mum, it's no relation to your sewing machine, but just as reliable. Yes, the name Singer goes back to about 1905, I believe, when they started with the bicycle industry. And there was one time the third largest British manufacturer. And now, like all of them, extinct. Another firm not often associated with open sports cars is the firm of Morris. This was the old Morris 6 open tourer. A firm that William Morris, who was later Lord Nuffield, he introduced the bullnose Morris back in about 1913, just after the Great War. His price cutting helped the Morris car to be built in quantity and become one of our main producers. That is a very unusual example of a Morris. And I might say very attractive too. Very British. All those single dials and the leather seats. Ah, now this is different. Going back a little bit more in age now, and the name we see on the front of here is BSA. Birmingham Small Arms, a name that we automatically associate with the motorcycle world. But no, they were very well known for producing a car back in the early days. And even on into the 30s. What a proud owner he must be to have a real head turner when people look and say, BSA? Well, going back to Morris again, we always associate Morris, I think, in the early days with the bullnose Morris. Very reliable old cars, a typical old flathead engine, we called them, the side valve engine, 4-cylinder, a little 3-speed gearbox. And here we now come along to another interesting and proud British make, the Railton. Just before World War II, Railtons were responsible for building a long line of very sort of strong, tough-built and attractive cars. And talking of attractive, what's more attractive than that Riley? I believe that's the Riley Sprite. Now that is typical what we call Brooklyn's appearance. And while I've been chatting on about how proud we are of our British vehicles, what about the Italians? This lovely old Lancia. Always noted for their advanced technology were the Italians. There certainly is a fine selection and a cross-section of old cars here today. Something there that the working man was more capable of buying back in the just post-war period. That's the Ford Prefect. The Ford Prefect came out before World War II, but after the war they redesigned the front end and put that rather large grille on there. Very simple car, side valve engine, 1172cc, that famous Ford engine that was fitted to all sorts of different types of vehicles. A 3-speed gearbox, very simple transverse suspension too, but it made motoring available to a lot of people that couldn't afford a more classic vehicle. Another fine example of Ford's there, the little popular, that appropriate green that we saw so many of. Ford Pops. How many people started their motoring life on a Ford Pop? In fact, it might be correct in calling this one an Anglia, because that is the name given to this particular one between 48 and 53 before the old traditional shaped Anglia came on the market. These little two-door models, once again with the 933cc side valve engine in. Back to Morris again. Whenever I see this particular model, Morris, it reminds me so much of my home village, where the butcher had one of these, and how polished and immaculate his car was, only ever used on a Sunday because he was a hard-working man all the week. And here, a firm that is still producing motor cars, not quite like this though. That up in Malvern in Worcestershire, the Morgan. Here with a V-twin matchless engine on the front, some of them fitted with JAP engines, Jap engines, no association there with the Far East. Jack Prestwick, producer of those fine engines. And once again, beautiful white Riley. Yes, any enthusiast would enjoy a day out at an event such as this, and if you don't go to these events regularly and you love your motor cars, well, I think it's time you started, because it's surprising how often you strike up a conversation with other people. And when something like this comes around, Bentley, W.O. Bentley. Now, what did he do for the British motoring? Back in the late 20s, he was winning the Le Mans races with cars of this nature. They were real races in those days, and if one of them crashed, they used to get out with hammer and tools, and they always had a mechanic with them, and they'd repair them and go on with a race. Now everything depends on just a few fifths of a second. Over to our American cousins now, here with the big Buick. America was full of big car manufacturers, and where we were producing thousands, they were producing millions. They were big, brash vehicles, and there's a lot of the fraternity in this country now who like to collect those old cars, and we like to see them. There's another Buick there. A little bit older, isn't it? Can you imagine that? Making its way through the States, bouncing around. Names like Buick and Chrysler, who use big side bulb engines. I believe that's a Chrysler, that one I'm not sure. Not too well up on these American vehicles, but very sound vehicles, capable of very long, high mileage. That too, I think, is one of the old Chrysler Sports, with the dicky seat on the back. Another view of our interesting Elvis. Not many of these produced, and it's nice to see them. This is the beauty of going to these shows, to see things that we thought were gone are still with us and well cared for. We must always be very proud, not only of the vehicles, but of the people who keep our tradition going. Ford Model A there. And as they leave the ring, having had their line up, and probably a photo call where if you're a keen photographer, you can go in and take photographs of them. And then we just listen to them as their gears whine and their engines rumble. And they leave the ring. Many of these old cars were found, you know, by the owners in rusty, derelict condition, sometimes in sheds, sometimes in an old orchard, perhaps with a tree growing up through it. And a lot of research and reading, loving restoration, and patience, and expense brought them back to their original condition. The big Yanks rather dwarf the other exhibits, don't they? But of course, petrol is still cheaper in the States. It was very much cheaper then. So the big engine to cover the big mileage was necessary. Hence, a different type of car evolved. Over to another rally now at Markle. And the ring parade there starts with another pride of them all, the MG. Built by Morris Garages, the Morris firm. They decided to make something a little sporty, so they built the MG back in the 30s. And what a traditional sports car that became. You just recall back during the war years when the Spitfire and Hurricane pilots went out to look for a car. They would usually look for something like this small MG because it reminded them so much of aircraft. The simple controls and the fly screen in the front, the simple screen. It's rather like a road-going airplane, that old MG there. And this, the lovely Rover, when Rover cars were real cars of distinction and a world leader. They even fitted these with a freewheel device whereby you didn't need to use your clutch. Played up the brakes a little bit because you didn't get the deceleration. But they really were a well-advanced, well-built car. That old timer going around there, that's got the dicky seat. Now, why is it called a dicky seat? Now, I was asked that at a rally recently and couldn't give the answer, so a little bit of research, 5 minutes in the local library. We all wear the Dickie front, which is a front you wear with your bow tie. And another name that Dickie carries is the leather apron that the drivers of the old stagecoaches used to wear over their knees. Well, the Dickie seat is the seat on a stagecoach, and when these open seats were built in the back of cars, and you had to put the lap rug over you, it followed on with the name of Dickie seat. There's a useful bit of information for you. Famous name of Austin there. That one too with a Dickie seat. Not many of those built. This is the more common Austin. One of the old original Austin 7s. What a beautiful car they were. Little 4-speed side valve engine. But going back to that age, that would only been the 3-speed box with the gear selection the opposite way around to usual. And to drive in Austin, they had a very short clutch, about 1/4 of an inch. Very delicate little vehicles to pull away without a stall, but oh, so reliable. Look at that fine example of the old Austin there. That's going back to the turn of the 20s, 30s, I should think. Probably used as taxi service or belonging to some lord of the manor. Got the brass fittings on the front, complete with picnic box on the back. Yeah, probably taking her ladyship out for the day. Can you imagine that?
Now, if you're travelling in style, we are. Next from 1954, a little 803.
Boonose Morris, once again, carrying that Dickie seat. This boot at the back could be used for luggage, you see, or the occasional 2 passengers.
Now, here is the Farina, and this is the first example of the Farina look. The Austin Cambridge, brought here by Mr. Smith from Worcester. Dates from 1959.
Yeah, I remember as a lad in a little village on the A37 in Somerset when we used to make a point of sitting there on the side of the road on a fine day, watching the cars go down towards Weymouth. And they were just few and far between. We used to take their numbers and check them again on the way back at night. It would be a bit of a hazardous job now, trying to keep up with it all. Our famous name of Alva's here now with a very lightweight sports body. Occasionally we'd see something of this nature, but in the main they were just the old saloons we would see ambling off with the family for the day. And this is what I enjoy about going to these rallies, is seeing these things that jog the memory and take us back to our, well, to our youth, or childhood, whichever. Every weekend during the summer there is a rally near you, and if you love old vehicles, then do go along and enjoy it, because they're worth seeing. Worth listening to. Yeah, worth smelling too.
From 1932 now, this locally owned 12.4 from Mr. Rook here in Much Marshall. I tell you what, must be sold at...
Now that Austin there, that's typical of the Austin used by the garages, etc., for their private hire and taxi work back in the 30s and later on through to the 40s. You could sit in the back of there and you had enough foot room, and behind the driver's seat would be a couple more little fold-down seats, good enough for children to sit in. Occasional 6-seat they would be, 6 or 7. Once again, Lagonda in a very traditional built way. This time, this was the W.O. Bentley designed Lagonda, because he went over from his firm because Rolls-Royce brought Bentleys out, and then W.O. himself did a lot of work for Lagondas. There's a lot of relationship between the two in this particular era. Good, solid British machinery, that. Some of the best, the world's best.
Now this is a car I always feel sorry when I see it, because some poor chap bought this brand new in 1939, Morris 8 Tourer, Heart's Desire. Then what happened? The war came and it was late. Of course, what you got with the A35, you got a respectable gear change.
Proudly flying his Welsh flag there.
Precision gear change, sporting stick as it went from gear to gear. Not much power, but a very sporty lovely car. Mr. Bob Carthew here from...
Another very well-known Morris was the Series E that came out around about 1938-ish and went on to be produced after World War II, later taken over by the Morris Minor 1000. But these little Series E's were very good, reliable cars, and Morris always seemed to put a little bit of quality in their small car that other manufacturers, I'm afraid, didn't. The better chrome, the better black finish inside, nice bit of leather, and a very attractive design. The original design had the headlights almost merged at wing shapes, but they weren't very efficient headlights, and Lucas has brought out this adaptation that brought them out with sealed beam units in them. So much an improvement. But what a nice little attractive car that was, the Series E Morris 8.
I mean, this has also got a tinted windscreen. I suspect the laminations are doing a little bit better than any other.
There's the old Austin 7 box again. And you could be well excused for saying that it had tinted windows, but I'm afraid this was a result of a lot of sunshine on the old triplex glass that used to burn up the celluloid that was sandwiched between the two layers of glass. And you ended up with some rather amber windows to look through, some of them with some terrible disfigurements. Oh, that's a beauty, that old Austin 7.
Was the car that swept the world, wiped out some motor industries and made others fuck their ideas up.
Same size tyres as the motorcycles of those days, 325 or 350 by 19 tyres.
Farm conditions over unmade roads.
And in fact, the fan belt, you could always find a spare fan belt in the Velocette spare parts, because Velocette motorcycles use that fan belt to drive their dynamo on their motorbike.
Car that pioneered a complete new style of motor.
Not a difficult car to look after, the Austin 7. Well, at one time, what was the best known car in the whole world? I think the Model T Ford. Everybody knew them, everybody recognized them. Laurel and Hardy wrecked hundreds of them. There she is, that famous old car designed and built by Henry Ford and used in every country in the world. We had a lot of them over here. We had one, a local delivery van used in my old village area right up until well into the 40s, and eventually turned it over by the local church and lost all this produce across the road. The Model T Ford, very unusual in as much as it didn't have an orthodox gearbox on it. It had this series of clutches. You had one for first gear down and let your foot back for second gear. You had the middle one for the brake and the outside one for reverse or something like that. And you pulled it up on the handbrake because that was more efficient than the foot brake. It took a lot of concentration to drive a Model T if you're only used to driving an ordinary car. But what fantastic machines they were. And then lots of them were converted into little lorries, into tractors. And even on airfields, they converted one at the back end with a device for going into the spinner of an aircraft engine and to start up the airplanes, called the Huck Starter. Oh yes, Model Ts certainly made their mark.
This is another chap that would break the heart of a car salesman. He bought this in, well, we don't actually know when, but when he was 70 around in Herefordshire, only the driver changes from time to time. Brought here by the Wye Valley Morris Minor Owners Club. Mike Williams is the...
That's another old Morris. That looks like the old 10-4. That meant 10 horsepower, 4-cylinder. Sluggish old cars, but reliable. But the bodywork on them, a real well-built, coach-built body there. Cars were individually built. Now I think this is where our country eventually faded out. I don't think our fraternity were ever any good at doing any mass production. We were the craftsmen of the days when cars were built as individual items, and I think when we started mass production, we lost our craftsmen, we lost our motor car. It was gradual, but it happened. But back in those days, a firm like Morris, every man's firm, built a car to be proud to own.
I tell you what, listen to the lovely sound as she goes round that exhaust pipe. Instantly recognisable. Class here, the Talbot AW75 Saloon, 1935. You may
That
wonder
beautiful little Morgan again. Old man Morgan, he once drove a three-wheeler and decided to build them. He went on building three-wheelers for many, many years. And now, of course, he built the four-wheelers with various engines in them. a very sought-after sports car that you've got to wait several years for, but apparently they're worth waiting for. There she is, that old Morgan three-wheeler.
This is the Indycar, isn't it? We actually recruit people in very unlikely ways for this event. Mr. Jennings was watching and I said, you want to be inside.
Another of our famous big British makes here. Now, I think I might be right in saying that's a Talbot.
These are actually operated on contract by the Ministry of Health.
Pardon me if I'm wrong, but I'm not like the commentator with a book in front of him. We've got to call them all to mind, but it does look like that back in its older days. One of the old traditional strong-built saloons of Britain.
Only 3 in Hereford.
Big wheels, big bodies, and a big engine.
One of these in Hereford, give him a wave. Odds are it's Mr. Jennings. Anyway, I'll tell you what, a traffic jam round here is something special. From 1937 now,
And looking at the radiator on there, I
chap was organised.
do believe that's a Crossley, a firm more associated with their lorry building. They went on building lorries right up and through for World War II, but did build a very interesting car back in the early days. And looking at that interesting radiator badge, which was very flash for its day, I do believe that one's a Crossley. But we shall have to go along afterwards to the stand-up and chat to the people concerned, because these owners are only too proud to give you the history. A later Boston 7 now, this is the Ruby. See, we've managed to modify the lines a bit more from the old traditional box, but it's still that same old 4-cylinder side valve engine, the wire wheels, and the rugged Austin reliability.
The only polite description was they were extremely rough.
Hello, I'm Alan East. Although I'm English, I live in Carmarthen now, and I'm sitting in my 1930 Alvis Silver Eagle. I bought it in 1959 from an RAF colleague. It had been off the road for 3 years. It was rather dilapidated, but it was complete, and I got it for £25. That compares with $595, which it would have cost had I bought it new in 1930. It's the Silver Eagle model. It has a 6-cylinder engine, just over 2 litres, and we ran it for several years. In fact, in the middle 60s, it was my only car for 2 years. I went to work in it every day. And then 78, there were several things needed doing before it could be MOT'd again, so it was off the road for about 10 years. And then we started a thorough chassis up restoration, which was finished in 1994. And that's the condition in which you see it today. A couple of years ago, we were in a show and a fella came up to me and introduced himself. Said, you won't believe this, but I passed my test in this car in London in 1949. He was a previous owner of the car. That put my knowledge of the history back a couple of years, because when I bought it, the earliest name and address in the logbook was the garage to which he had sold it back in 1951, so that was good to meet him. Nowadays we enjoy using it. We attend several shows and runs and rallies. Only yesterday I was carrying a Carnival Queen in a parade. We do about 2,000 miles a year, and it really has brought us lots of fun and made us lots of friends.
Well, there's one very contented owner. You can understand it, can't you? And I'll bet there's a contented owner of that lovely old Bentley there, with the rose body. That's what they called the Rose Bentley, when Rose and Bentley were building almost identical cars, except for that different radiator, of course. But it is wonderful, as the driver was telling us just now, to find out the history of those old cars. It's rather like a Visit Your Life program on each of the vehicles. It's good to have the original registration too. It's amazing how often you strike up conversations with other people looking in the cars there and comment, and you make friends at these rallies. There's no doubt about that. Made a few over the past years that I've been interested. No other country in the world produced a car interior like Great Britain with the walnut fascias, etc. They really were great. What a lovely setting this is for a lineup of old cars there with the Daimler. Not only proud of the exterior, but the engine as well, so he's going to leave it up for everyone to see. And I don't blame him looking at that. Some of the pre-war Daimlers built a sleeve valve engine, which was very expensive to produce, but they were determined to build as good a motor as they could possibly could. But just look at the finish there, that all-alloy motor. That's typical too. Not many cars had a boot in those days. They either made more room for the passengers, and if you did decide to go on holiday or go on a picnic, you had your detachable pannier to put on the back. Some in the shape of a picnic basket. That too was typical of the day. The badge bar on the front showing his memberships and the initial D to typify one of our oldest and most famous makes, that of Daimler. Very different gearbox in the Daimler too. It had a Wilson epicyclic gearbox, which was an unusual setup, pre-select gear change, and of course a fluid flywheel, which did away with the clutch. The little lever on the right of the gear, the steering column there, is where you would select your different gears. Earlier we spoke of BSA. Now we have a nice little lineup of BSA vehicles here, BSA front-wheel drive cars. Said they were rare, but we seem to have hit upon a club here. This is a lovely thing too about owning an old car. If you, whatever make you've got, you can join a club for that make, without exception. And of course, when you've got something very rare, like the old BSAs, it's very helpful too if you're looking for spares. The front-wheel drive club, eh? We all thought the front-wheel drive was something that happened in the latter years with our modern cars, but no. Famous firms tried it a long, long time ago. And BSAs built their own engine for this, little simple 4-cylinder side valve. Spares for every occasion. I'll bet there's a lot of interesting tail swapping and hints and tips going backward and forward between the owners of a remote club such as this, the BSA and the Front Wheel Drive Club. Back to the traditional shape Riley again. Always a lovely low sprung car. Excellent car to handle. They all seem to drive like they're on rails, the Rileys. Even the older ones of this nature. Famous SU carburetors again. All cars of quality use that old SU carburetor. No fuel injection back in those days. Many motifs such as this could be bought to put on the radiator. Then eventually they became declared as dangerous mascots, I believe. But they were very proud things to own. Some car manufacturers had their own particular mascot, like the Rolls-Royce one we're so familiar with. But you could buy many, and it was always a proud thing to display. Of course, they didn't get stolen back in those days. It'd be quite a risk now leaving your car with something of value like that on it. The Riley 2 of this era, they were similar to the Daimlers in as much as they had that pre-select gear change with the fluid flywheel, other than the sports cars, which were stuck to the traditional hand change. Beauty at all angles. You can't argue with that. Now then, we're going over to Rawton in Wiltshire now, not far from Lyneham, the home of the Hercules aircraft, making his way over the hangar there. This is one of my favourite rallies here because there are so many vehicles at this rally, and it's a rally that's growing each year. Now, we had a chat earlier on about the Morris 8 Series E. This is just the earlier Morris 8 Tour, and a nicer example you'd never find of that little car than this. And typical Morris, a lovely finish. Although this is not the original finish, of course, it has been brought up very much to look like a showroom Morris. And even back in those days, those little cars had hydraulic brakes on them. Superb little vehicles. Not very wide to sit in the front. You got very friendly with people in the front of cars in those days. They weren't as wide as they are now. But reliable, cheap to run, and attractive. The little Morris 8 Tour. Not only are people gathered around the ring to watch the cars go around the ring, but you can see the young lady driving the Morris 8 Tour, how much she's admiring the cars out on the display. And believe me, here at this show, there are literally thousands. Dozens of different clubs come along, like the A30-35 club you can see in the background there, swapping their ideas, swapping information, going to the Auto Jumbo and finding bits and pieces. Back now to the Series E, which followed on from that tour. As I said earlier, this was a very popular, it became a more attractive car than we'd been producing. Fitted with a 4-speed gearbox, once again hydraulic brakes. So reliable and dependable were these vehicles that the post office bought thousands and thousands of the van version known as the Series Z. I'm sure many members in the crowd there can remember having shared ownership with such a vehicle, or even known one or rode in one years ago. And I say this is what these shows are all about. Nostalgia, memories. Another later MG now. This is one of the T models that came out after World War II. Still very much a traditional MG, but now we've gone over to more streamlined mudguards with a running board instead of the little cycle type mudguards. We've done away with the wire wheels. And eventually all that will merge into a streamlined shape, and the old traditional British look will be gone to the MGA, the MGB, the MGC, but not with the T model. Still that steering wheel back in the lap and the big round dials in front of you. And the sound of that four-cylinder engine buzzing, and you aren't very far from the exhaust pipe at the back either, are you? Beautiful cars, and very sought after, the MG. Superb bit of restoration, that. When you think of the original cost of some of these vehicles, some of them in the hundreds, the number of pounds is in the thousands spent on them to bring them back to those standards. We ought to be very proud to have such enthusiastic people amongst us to renovate them and renew our memories of way back. And when I first saw this vehicle, well, I started to drool over memories of the old SS100 Jaguar, only to learn later that it's not quite what it appears to be. For all intents and purposes, yes, a good look-alike of that famous car built by Jaguars just before World War II, but this is a replica, and what a wonderful replica it is. But saying that, it still has Jaguar components in it, the 3.4 twin overhead camshaft engine. But you can buy these kits now to build up for yourself to take you back to the days of the old pre-war motoring by Jaguar. What a lovely car that is. See what I mean about the British sports car? Looking along that long bonnet and a couple of wings and headlights in your view there. Oh, there's no modern car can compete with that. Now we saw the little Morris 8 Tourer, the open Tourer. This is the saloon version. This is an all black one, but quite a lot of these were built with two-tone, but always something in black, blue and black, green and black, or red and black. Same old solid Morris construction. What surprises me too, some of these cars that I meet at the rallies, the drivers tell you the original mileage, and some of them are still quite low mileage, because years ago people would only drive a car probably to church on Sunday or just a weekend away, and then they'd be stored away for many years and come on the road again with a very, very low mileage on them. They aren't like us commuters now who just jump in their car to go and post a letter and put up mileage hour after hour. It's just a rare occasion to go out in the car at one time. Not only was it expensive to run a car for an ordinary working family, of course, to maintain a car, because you decarbonize them about every 10,000, and about 30-odd thousand miles you had a major overhaul. Such was the poor quality of lubricants back in the early motoring days, but of course now you just sit in a car and service it regularly, oil change, and the engine would go on for a couple 100,000 miles. It wasn't so back in the old oils days. Now a little pre-war MG now on the J models. Car there with relatives who go back to the history of Brooklands, that wonderful racing circuit that is no more, where you could just put your foot flat down and belt round there. What other colour could you paint a car like that with a history like that? British racing green.
33. Model J2. The J2 is it? Of course, these actually were born at Brooklands, and I think they could supercharge them, do all sorts, and drive it.
Something to enthuse over that.
And you know, sitting in there is like a road-going Tiger Boss, isn't it? It really is a sports car of the 30s tradition. A lovely machine. I really am pleased to see that one. Real bit of British motoring there, the MG. So what club are you?
The driver making sure that the commentator knows all about his little car. And I don't blame him.
Very sociable cars, no matter who you
Another fine example of our Morris 8 Tourer.
I always like the Morris 8. Lovely to see. What about an E-Type Jaguar then? Isn't that a bit of class? Look at the lines of that. Long time ago now.
Going on holiday, look at the suitcase on the back. They always had these folding luggage grids that you could fold up out of the way, in nobody's way, and then they'd sort of slot down quite easily, and you could strap your baggage on the back there. What a display, and what thousands of people who come to see old cars. Now, this is something different. We had a Renault collection at this show, and this is one of the old Renaults. I always think back to the old Renault we had in the village and the shape of that bonnet on the front. You imagine you picking that up and finding a sewing machine under it. Such was the shape of it. And just behind that bonnet is a wider piece. That's the radiator behind the engine. French design. Nothing wrong with that. Quite big engines in these old Renaults too. I should imagine that old one would have something like a 3-litre engine in it, but look at the samples of the headlights and the side lights on there.
She goes out every year, did the 100 centenary of Renault into France and back, no problem. No problem. What size engine would that be? 3.5 litre. That's a big motor for a car like this, isn't it? How many cylinder? 4-cylinder? 4-cylinder. 3.5 litre. About sort of 45, 50. Good. Steer's nice too. What about brakes?
That style body was referred to as the boat tail. No need to describe why.
That really is look. Thank you.
Now, can you just imagine trundling around Paris on a lovely summer evening, you ladies with your long dresses on in the parasol, enjoying an evening out in that beautiful old Renault. Oh, what an imagination this man has. Once again, the firm of Renault, another of these large engine open Tourers. As you'll see, built with right-hand drive, a lot of old French cars were. Of course, a lot of them spent their life over here. We don't see many vintage Renaults around the shows, and to see this collection at Rolton Show was certainly a treat. Those large wheels with the wooden spokes known as artillery wheels in the trade. What a fine vehicle. What a fine show. On a fine day. What else could you ask for?
Pretty good for an old car, isn't it? Not bad, because that's all you get the chance to do with any car nowadays on the road. But hopefully you could stop, but again, that's it. Yes, you were great. But they were beautiful cars.
vast woodwork and secret compartments and went to somebody of high sort of rank, and then was brought into this country as a total rape in 1984, and a lot of people never thought it would see it on the road again.
You saw different. Did you do it yourself?
It was 90% of the work was done by one or two people before I got hold of it earlier this year. But this year it's been, for the first time in the last 3 years, been on the road, and we've done about 400 miles in France. We've just done the Sedgwick run, and use it whenever we can.
Isn't it wonderful, an old car like this, that they thought had seen it then, they're suddenly back in life again. I think it really is wonderful. Maybe they couldn't do the same, you know, you know. Anyway, thank you very much.
Still entertaining our Renault Club, another much smaller engine version here, but still very much the Renault lines. You see that diamond shape on the dashboard. Renault still to this day depict that, and it's one I always find rather interesting is the history behind some of these shapes and how far they go back. The old badges that they designed back at the turn of the century, some of these firms still carry on their vehicles today. But that rather blind front end of the Renault was somewhat unique, I think, and help you recognize them. And this is what I always like to comment on so often. With these old cars, you could recognize them coming, whereas now with the modern vehicles, there's not a lot of difference in them, is there? Something about French design that's so different. Now we're leaping forward again to the sort of late 30s, early 40s Renault. The artistic look, the unusual colour, and the very proud owner who's made sure that he's got the information there for the commentator. Look at those proud kids in the back. That's a superb bit of styling, that. But this is what we see at shows. And I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this video will be regular visitors to rallies and enjoy your old cars. And some of you will be seeing them for the first time. They are out there at all the shows in the area, and there's bound to be one near you during the summer. Go along and enjoy it, and I'll bet you have some happy memories and meet some interesting people. It's a wonderful pastime. It's a wonderful the enjoyment, not only the transport, but the other side of interest that cars have given us. Man's pride in ownership, in rebuilding, the pride in dragging up that history behind some old rare vehicle such as this beautiful Renault here and displaying it to the public. It's not showing off. It's proud achieving something. That's what owning a vintage car is all about.